Hey guys, what's cracking? Godsman here, coming at you with another deck profile. Today it's going to be another deck update, this one on the Destined One of Protection, Alden. Now, the Destined One of Protection, Alden, having been revealed in Set 4 and subsequently gaining some support in Set 5, is a pretty solid deck for the Ketter's Sanctuary Nation, and one that was somewhat polarizing upon release, as while some people did like the new direction for Alden and its more defense combo-centric kind of playstyle, others felt that was rather underwhelming, and the moniker of the Destined One of Protection being limited to a power boost and retire protection is not really good enough for that grandiose title. However, despite the polarization, it does appear that Alden has actually proven itself to be a pretty competent deck in the standard format, so much so that the list I'm going to present to you today had actually won the first ever Discord server tournament for standard format hosted in my own Discord, link down in the description below if you're curious. Now, going over the list here for a bit, let's just get right into the meat and potatoes. I hope you enjoy. Now, starting off with the ride line, of course, the ride line is the exact same as what came out in Set 4. We've got the Knight of Heavenly Expression Admiss as the starter, followed by the Energy Generator. These can be interchangeable as you choose, so I just use what's on brand. Furthermore, the grade 1 is the Knight of Heavenly Sao Tranquilla. Tranquilla's skill states that when it's brought upon by Everlasting Sky Knight Sajess, you can look at the top 5 cards of the deck and add a grade 2 or greater card from among them and put it in the hand. But if you didn't reveal the card, you get Energy Charge 2. So regardless, you're going to get some value from this, and the Energy Charge 2 may seem a little bit weak at first glance, but our main draw power comes from our grade 3, which is an EB4 to draw 1. So because that's a little bit higher than the natural EB or EC3 accumulation every single turn, this offsets that for a couple turns effectively. So it does get you some advantage on the back end in either scenario. Then for the grade 2, we have Everlasting Sky Knight Sajess, of course, because we're going to proc Tranquilla, we're going to have to ride into this. And this one has a very nice effect because when it's wrote upon by an Alden, it could be any Alden. So that's really nice if you're running other kind of Aldens. We're not here, of course. You Soul Blast one to look at the top 5 cards of the deck and choose a grade 3 or less card from among them and call it to the rear circle. No real surprises here, it's just like it was last time, and in all honesty, very solid support card, and although the Soul Blast can be a little bit costly given the economy of this deck, it's not that bad as long as you manage your resources carefully. Now for the big kahuna, the Destined One of Protection, Alden. Now, just as I explained in my last video, Alden is a really nice sword and shield type strategy, where you do utilize your field rather aggressively for really nice chained combo attacks that then can pivot towards defensive plays with cards that gain extra shield when they intercept, the ability to move cards to the Guardian Circle via Church Order, and also the ability to defend them from certain things like battle by giving them 10k boost, and also retire effects by, well, preventing retire effects. So there's a lot going on with the Alden here, and it's a somewhat sophisticated deck to master at first glance, but once you do, it's extremely rewarding to fight. Alden's effect, just to give a quick overview, says that when your unit would be called by this unit's ability to a rear circle with a unit, take a shot every time I say unit here, return the unit that is on that rear circle to hand instead of putting it in the drop. So essentially what it means is that if you use Alden's skill to call over something, they won't go to the drop zone, they'll instead return to the hand. So even if you commit on turn 2 with a full field and you then start calling over with Alden's skill, they're not going to be wasted, they just return it back, and that's super nice. It helps make you commit to the board early without having to feel the consequence of that committal. And sometimes when you have a full board, but you do draw into better cards later, you don't have to compromise. You can just return the stuff that you call over back to the hand. It's very nifty skill. It also has the ability when it attacks to draw a card and then call something from the hand with plus 10,000 power, thus a multi-attack. It gets that 10,000 power to the end of the opponent's turn, and it can be retired by card effects. Super nice. Furthermore, we have the Divine skill. Now, this Divine skill isn't some super grandiose finisher, but rather more of a setup skill, where you can Soul Blast one to look at the top 7 cards of the deck and call 2 cards, any 2 cards from among them, no different card names, no grade restrictions, no nothing, whatever the frick you want. You call them the rear circle and they can't be retired by card effects until the end of the opponent's turn. So yeah, more protection, more advantage, it's very good. There's basically no reason why you wouldn't shotgun this immediately, including if you have a full board, because again, this is calling by the effect of Alden, so you'll be able to return those cards back to the hand. Very versatile, easy, and virtually free, because even though the Soul Blast can be a little bit tough at first glance, a Soul Blast is something that you're always going to have access to right off the bat, so your opponent can't choke you out of it unlike CB or whatever, right? So very versatile card, very fast, very good. Of course, from the main deck, we're going to be running 3 copies of Alden itself because it has Persona Ride, and Persona Ride is very important for this deck in particular because you do have some numbers going around, but they're not exactly the most hard-hitting numbers. So you do oftentimes need to see Persona Ride if you want to have a good chance at closing out the game that turn. You are fine with defending and holding out for a long time because it is the Destined One of Protection, right? So of course its defense is quite nice, but there are times where if you have the Persona Ride, you may want to prefer to close things out and not leave it to chance in case your opponent might pull some funny business on you. Now, the other other main grade 3 you have in the deck is Heavenly Blade of Liaison Razionel. The Razionel, in addition to having some really nice art, also has two pretty powerful skills where you can Energy Blast for to draw, as I alluded before, and then the main skill, where when you call over it by the effect of your Alden, you can give the unit that called over it plus 10,000 power. Reminder, this activates anytime you do this, so it isn't just under 10,000 power for the battle phase, so that thing you multi-attack was plus 20k, but if you call over it during the main phase and return it back to the hand, then you can give those things plus 10,000 power, and wouldn't you know it, you can then just immediately recall this EB4 again if you got it and draw another card. So yeah, a lot of good interchangeability, and the fact that they're just, these cards work so sublimely together that if you understand your combo lines and can use your cards effectively, yeah, it's very good. Furthermore, if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, you can Soul Blast to choose a rear guard and stand it. Of course, you wouldn't do this during the main phase most likely, but during the battle phase, it does lead to a 5 attack turn, even though it is grade 3 or greater locked. So if you're going first, be mindful to not swing with both front row because you won't be getting this restand off. The other grade 3 we're running is Sajess. So Sajess, just one of those really pog staples. I've noticed that it hasn't been popping up as much in most Keter Sanctuary decks these days, but not so long ago, this guy was probably the talk of the town as far as Keter generics go. There's nothing Sajess just does not do. It gets power, it gets shield, it can put a card into the soul, it can kind of stack a card because you scry the top and see where you want to put it. It can get a ton of power with its counterblast skill, and it can convert over trigger to give power to another unit of your choice. So yeah, it's a very versatile multi-tool for the clan, and as long as you see one Sajess, this is a great way to make up for Alden's sometimes lack of offense by just having a real bludgeoning hammer of a unit on the field. Now for the grade 2s, we've got the main grade 2, which is the Knight of Heavenly Drive Dilpraze. So Dilpraze came out in set 5, and this card is a real gangbuster unit. So it has two skills. The first is that when it's placed on rear circle by the ability of your Vanguard with Alden in its card name, so heck, set 13 Alden can use it too, funnily enough, you can choose one of your other units and get 5,000 power to it until end of turn. So even though it's not for itself, it could include the Vanguard or whatever rear guard. It could give it to the unit behind it if you're able to boost it. So vicariously, it still like gives itself power that way. So yeah, very versatile power up, right? But if it was placed on the rear circle that already had a unit on it, then this is going to give 10,000 instead of 5,000, which obviously is super good for Alden because you generally would do it anyway. So what's nice is that if you notice, right, when you're calling off the skill of Alden, particularly over Razionel, that's the combo line, you're going to get plus 20,000 power to that unit, but nothing else is really getting power in this particular combo. So what you do is you call Dilpraze presumably, and then you give 10,000 power either to the Alden that's still mid-battle, this is a win attack skill, so it's still in time to threaten more power on the opponent, or you could give it to another rear guard if you restood it off at just about any game state. Furthermore, of course, if you place it during the main phase, well, same thing goes there, and you could, heck, placing it during the main phase off the Divine Skill of Alden is even better because if you restand that unit with Razionel, you're double dipping the power boost that it gave off of it. So yeah, super strong card there. It also has another effect where if you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Alden in its card name, it gets shield plus 5,000. So just a super pog 10k intercept, and recall that because of the effect of Alden, it can't be retired by card effects, and it's a 20k base, so your opponent will have a hard time poking it or just popping it off the field. So this is a 10k intercept that they probably won't be denying. Furthermore, we have Knight of Skyflow's Gelment. This is a somewhat controversial card because in comparison to other cards like what's its name, Nebula Invoke Dragon, yeah, that's the one for Impaldio, right, which is 20k, but it's a continuous shield value rather than an intercept. This card gets more shield value, but it has to intercept. See, when it intercepts specifically, that's the only time this activates, and it's the only skill it has. If you have a grade 3 or greater Alden, it gets shield plus 20,000. So yeah, 25k intercept is very powerful, but it's only on that specific timing, so it can lose out on certain matchups. Thankfully, they if you did call this off the effect of Alden, then it should be pretty hard to pick off. But still, Gelment is somewhat situational, but Gelment there can kind of warp your opponent's attack patterns to your favor, because if they read the Gelment and start attacking the Gelment, you can sort of pick and choose if you want to defend with it or not, right? Because let's say, for instance, that they poke Gelment with a 20k swing, right? And then you 5k shield that. That is actually better because it means that because remember, it's going to be a 20k base off of Alden, right? So 5k shield there is better than having to spend 10k shield to defend your 13k base Alden. So depending on the numbers that they're bringing to bear on Gelment, if they're trying to deny the really big intercept, you may actually come out ahead in that department. So if you use it wisely, it's a very nice tool at your disposal. The final grade 2 unit card we have is Divine System Financier. It's the order engine card, so you just search him, bring with Mercy from the deck, and put in the order zone right away for a Soul Blast. This is another card that's Soul Blast along with Razionel and Alden, so do be careful about that. And him bringing with Charity, we don't really need to explain it. It just moves a card from the rear circle over to the Guardian Circle, bind it afterwards. What I will say in the context of this deck that I really like about it is this means that you can early commit triggers and also PGs to the field in order to shield with them, right? So not only can you boost with them in the moment, but then moving to the Guardian Circle means that you still got the defensive value of them after the fact. So that's what really brings together the sublime nature of the Sword and Shield style that Alden has going for it. And if you call, let's say, you can really do this. You can call a PG off of Alden's skill, thus it can't be retired, and then you move it to Guardian Circle. And that's a really nice way to get around certain anti-PG strategies like Blankmeyer and Drag Strider Luward, which is hyper pog, and if you pull off that maneuver, you might just win the game on that alone. So it is a really cool play. Furthermore, this effect actually has like another benefit going for it, which is that, recall, if you're trying to like call stuff and move the Guardian Circle, maybe like, well, maybe I don't have the guard with those, so they stay on the field. What now? Well, remember, when Alden is calling over things, you return them back to the hand. So let's say that you committed, I don't know, a PG and a trigger on your field, but the next turn your opponent just simply swings 10k and passes, right? So you didn't feel inclined to use either of those cards. You stand, you draw, you ride Alden, Divine Skill right off the bat, Soul Blast, and call the 2 units over those 2 cards. Thus, said trigger and PG returns to the hand, where you can shield with it if you want. And then from there, you can call it again if you feel like doing it again. But yeah, that's up to you. So you see where you can kind of have your cake and eat it too, as long as you sequence things correctly. And I think that's what this deck demands more than anything, is a mastery of sequencing. The final grade 2 card we have is another order, this time a Blitz order, that being Twincast Protect. So this has definitely been more popularized in recent meta trends, and I'm glad people caught on to it because this is a very nutty regardless piece. It's effectively shielding you twice for the value of 1 card. You can use it from the hand in order to protect one of your units from being attacked by giving it 10k power. So it's like a 10k shield, so like a draw effect trigger, sort of. But then this is the real kicker. When your unit is attacked, any unit, right, you can remove it from the drop in order to give 5,000 power to end a battle to that unit for each of its grades. So for Alden, this would be a plus 50k card from the drop zone right off the bat, and a little bit less if you're trying to defend one of your rear guards, but it's still a nice, really good trick maneuver, and just adds more of a robust lineup to your defensive options, right? I mean, heck, just about everything has higher level shield going for it. Not only is this a double defense card, Financier is a 10k shield if you use it off a church. You get a 10k shield off Dilpraze. Gelment is a huge 25k intercept. Sajess has 10k shield continuously if your opponent checks a trigger. There's just a lot of added defense here that most decks don't enjoy, while still being able to do some really nice aggressive combo lines, right? Moving on to the grade 1s, we have Cerrgaon. Cerrgaon is only a 3 of, and the reason why is because we're just trying to make space, and even though Cerrgaon is definitely a really strong Keter generic here, it's not like hyper important in Alden specifically. It's good for your early game, but then once you go into the later terms, you would actually prefer just to establish board and keep board as much as possible, because you have so much shield anyway that it's more worth it to make sure that you have an optimal full board than it is to just spruce up your hand by an extra card. So that's why we're only running 3 of it. Then we have Wedgeffluence. Wedgeffluence's effect states that you can soul charge 1 when you boost your grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Alden, and it gets 2,000 power. Furthermore, when it boosts anything, it's 5,000 power continuously if you got an Alden. This is a little bit of an iffy card, because if you'll notice, the soul charge here is mandatory when you boost the Vanguard. So I've actually seen legitimate times, and in tournament play, when Nabs is running this list, keep in mind, again, this is the tournament topping list for our server, he will sometimes not boost with Wedgeffluence deliberately, because that soul charge could be painful to him. Maybe he's running out cards in deck, or he already has enough soul as it is, so he'd rather not risk losing out on a potential trigger when he needs to kill from it, right? So you have to be somewhat careful about this, because it could mess you up just as much as it could help you, right? But we still run it in 3 copies, because again, there's a lot of soul blasting going on here, and this is one of our most reliable means of actually getting soul, so you might just have to bite the bullet and get the soul charge here and there. Next up, we have Magic of Connected Threads, Peraram, or Threaded Connections. It's a little bit of a translation thing, right? Now, this card says when it's placed on rear circle during your main phase, no, it doesn't have to be from the hand, so this is live off the Alden Divine skill. You can CB1 to choose a card that's equal to or less great than your Vanguard and call it. Then you draw a card. So yeah, This is really nifty, and do bear in mind though that when you're calling off this skill, you don't bounce back if you're overcalling, because remember, this is not calling off the effect of Alden when you do Peraram skill. Peraram herself may have been called by Alden, but not whenever you call off her skill. So preferably you're going to want to call to the open circle if you can help it with this skill, right? So yeah, do be careful about that sequencing. Furthermore, it does have the continuous skill that gets 5k power as long as your Vanguard's grade 3 or greater and you have 4 or more units, which can include your Vanguard, right? This should just go without saying. I mean, you just establish board as a Keter unit by nature, and also Alden will give deliberate protection from retire effects, so you should be able to keep board in most scenarios here. So this is a pretty reliable effect, and thankfully it also means it could be a 13k attacker if you're actually in a somewhat compromised game position, right? Which can happen. Knight of Bright Bow Criegwell is going to be our final grade 1, and it's one of the new cycle cards from set 5, and it states that if your Razionel has no cards, yeah, no problem there, then if you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard, you can pitch it from the hand and put 2 cards from your drop or soul that were from the ride line back into the deck. Note that your ride line doesn't call itself, nor does it like remove itself or anything like that, so you should have access to your whole ride line and soul or drop when you're using this. You can look at the top 7 and add a grade 3 that's different name from your Vanguard, right? So in this case, it'll allow you to add Sajess or Razionel from the top 7 to the hand. But thankfully, if you do whiff the top 7 search, which is definitely whiffable, you can just return this back to the hand, and that can be pretty useful because it has the effect that if your damage zone has 3 or more cards, when it's placed on Guardian Circle, it gets 5,000 shield. Then if your opponent's G zone has a card in it, you can bind a grade 3 or greater card from soul or drop, and it gets another 10,000 shield on top of that. So in Stride deck set matchups, which could be a little bit devastating for you because you're somewhat more mid-range, so if you play into late game against them, they could outscale you like crazy. This 20k shield could really come in handy. Yet just more and more shield value that's tacked onto this deck. It is a tanky juggernaut, so tanky in fact that, I mean, it just kind of swept, dude. I freaking threw, just for reference, I threw Full Blast Turbo at this, and it just did not care about Full Blast Turbo. I got full combo off on turn 3 with like optimal setup. It hardly flinched at that, right? So yeah, Alden will endure just about anything that this format has to bring to bear on it. Your generics are rather self-explanatory. You run 3 Keter PG of your choice along with Elementary Sanctitude. You have 8 critical triggers, Blade Feather being 4 of them. This one can move itself into the soul, which, as I said before, kind of a tough resource, so that actually is somewhat relevant for you. We run front triggers just to soup up your numbers and make sure that you can still hit over certain defensive thresholds, so we're running 3 Alpac for that. 4 normal heals because you don't know what match you're going to get into, and this meta isn't really flooded with one kind of effect over the other that would proc a particular heal trigger, so we're just going to play it safe and just get the 15k vanillas. Finally, for our over trigger, we're going to run Idle Spiral. It's the most safe option. It just adds it's basically a 9th crit in your deck, and returning any card from your drop zone back to the hand can be very nice. I'd say the best thing that you can get off this skill is a Persona Ride copy in case you haven't seen another one, or maybe you healed it out of the damage zone, because you do need Persona Ride to maintain your aggressive tempo against the opponent, unfortunately, right? For all the defense, this deck can sometimes lack in offense if you're not careful and see the things you need to see. And that's going to be the deck list. Overall, this deck is a very, very powerful deck, and when we're moving over to the stats here, the stats do shine on it rather favorably. For offense, it's going to get a solid 3 out of 5. It's about middle of the road as far as offense is concerned. You can get 5 attacks, but only if you're going second. You get some pretty decent numbers, but it is Persona reliant. And in a compromised game state where you don't have a lot of cards on the field, you're going to be a wet noodle, basically. And you're relying on the Alden Razionel combo for most of your numbers, and that's mostly centered on one rearguard specifically that you call off of Alden, which I've seen many times where you just have to call a trigger because your hand is just nothing but defensive cards anyway. So yeah, it's pretty middle of the road there. Defense, however, is just a 5 out of 5. I'd give it a 6 if I could. I mean, like, come on, guys. It's the Destined protection. How could we not, right? Just about everything that you have as a staple in this deck has added shield value to it, right? And on top of that, you can move those cards from the field to the Guardian Circle off Church Order, which is an incredible benefit. And even the X factor of the retire protection, as well as, and this is probably like one of the most underappreciated aspects, the 10k power lasting until the end of the opponent's turns means that they cannot harass your field by battle. And that card that you called that is probably going to be a Dilpraze or a Gelment or something, they're not going to be able to harass it so easily. So yeah, there's just a sublime defense and multiple kinds of defense you could bring to bear. I mean, heck, Even though this is generic to most decks, this deck can use Twincast Protect about as well as good of them. So yeah, whether it be field, hand, drop zone, what have you, you have multiple modes of defense. As far as the consistency is concerned, this deck definitely gets a 4 out of 5. You're able to pretty darn reliably see the field and setup that you want to go for most of the time. The Divine Skill is going to be really crucial here, because even though you don't necessarily see the best things off of it, you can call anything and it will be useful in one way or another, because even if you overcall it by Alden, in the case it's like a defensive card, you just add it back to the hand or move it with Church, right? Into the deck a bit with Peraram and Criegwell and Cerrgaon. Yeah, a lot of consistency pieces, right? The only reason why it's not a 5 out of 5 is because you can still sometime lose out on a particular piece. Like maybe no matter how hard you try, maybe you don't see the Dilpraze you need for that good mix of offense and defense, right? Or maybe you're really trying to dig for the Sajess to use its bludgeoning skill and you just can't see one of your Sajesses, right? So because there isn't really any guarantee on what you're going to get off these like digging and searching effects, it's going to hurt a little bit. And unlike something like Razionel, which is a 5 out of 5 because you can constantly recur the guaranteed units that are lying in your drop zone, this doesn't have that kind of benefit. So sometimes you might just break, particularly in the later game when you run out of those extra units to bring back to field for full offense. So we're going to leave it at the 4 there. Recovery is also a 4 because, again, sometimes your field can be left destitute, especially in non-retire removal matchups, and so you can be sensitive to it, but most of the time you'll be able to have a lot of card advantage, bring back your board, protect your board, and even with just a few cards, if you do have the Razionel, which by the way, when you're overcalling Razionel, it should return to the hand. So unless your opponent has some way of making you magically discard it, which, let's be real, this format doesn't have that, you should be able to have at bare minimum that Razionel to get you your multi-attack line going. Now, everything else from there is somewhat debatable. We don't know what you're going to have in a given game state, but that on its own should be enough to let you push a somewhat serviceable offense. So even though it's not the greatest, your recovery still gets a very solid 4 out of 5. The economy here is also going to be a 4 out of 5. As far as energy goes, you don't really have any obligations on energy. You can Razionel as much as you want, and you don't really need to do Razionel. So it's really just more like a you get to Energy Blast 4, right? So not a you need to, that's powerful, so check there. CB, you only need 1 CB every turn, and it's just from the Alden's main skill that you use, so aside from that CB, the rest of it is very fair play. And the only other card that you would generally CB for in this deck is going to be Peraram and maybe your Sajess in some situations there, but those are like mostly one and done, and from there you can like heal out or whatever, right? And this deck, even though I'm not running it, because again, I don't think CB is an option, is like an issue in this deck, which is why it's going to get the 4 out of 5. You do have a few different countercharge options like Turnar and also Cerrgaon, which does work because this can call during battle and it's a divine skill unit, so Cerrgaon works with it really well. So you have a few options there, even if you felt CB was a problem, but it certainly is not. The one linchpin here in this deck's economy that's going to keep it from the perfect 5 out of 5 is Soul. Sometimes you break on Soul. You have to use the Soul already with your ride line. You use the Soul for divine skill with Alden right off the bat, and you use the Soul every time you do the multi-attack combo with Razionel. And the only ways to build Soul here inherently, oh, and I actually missed one. Financier also Soul Blast, so bear that in mind too, right? The only ways to get Soul usually is going to be Wedgeffluence and maybe Sajess if the card that you see on top is more worth in the Soul than on the top, and so that one's kind of debatable. And even the Soul charge there could be somewhat painful. So yeah, not the easiest time getting Soul. Perhaps one of your best ways to get Soul is just simply seeing your Persona rides and getting the natural accumulation of Soul from that on its own. So space can get a little tight as far as the cards of the Vanguard is concerned. Do be careful about that. And because of this, it's going to stay at a 4, but it's still pretty darn good. And then finally for control, it's just a 1 out of 5. It's an anti-control deck. Come on, guys. It's not trying to get rid of the opponent's board, it's trying its damage to keep its own board. So it has no room or focus to try and do the opposite to the opponent, right? So it's just going to be a 1 out of 5, but that's not really going to hurt this deck's ranking whatsoever because, man, can I just say, control is not necessary. We have all these other things going on for this deck. So as far as overall grades is concerned, this one is a bit of a difficult choice, right? Because there's some ups and there's some downs and all arounds with it, and it does kind of require a good pilot to really bring the best out of this deck. So for the time being, I'm going to give this deck a B+. It's a very, very powerful, I'd say tier 2 strategy. It's not at the top of its game because it does have a couple vulnerability points, and probably its biggest issue is that 3 out of 5 in offense, where sometimes you just hit like a wet noodle, and depending on how high octane the opponent is, like maybe you're fighting against Varga or Odium or something, you may just not be able to afford to have weak turns against them because your days may be numbered. Even if you are the Destined One protection, they can still press you like heck, right? So because of that like somewhat glaring weakness, we're stuck here with a deck that may not always be able to finish the job and die for it. So in an aggro-based format like this, where early game is really important, it does have really good early game, but being able to sustain your aggression after the early game and potentially even scale into late game, a lot of the really strong decks can actually scale into the late game, whether or not you're a Stride deck set or you're something like Razionel, which as you get more damage and you get more cards of note accumulated in the drop zone, you just get better and stronger, right? This deck doesn't necessarily do that beyond just Persona, right? So it sort of plateaus in its offense as well. Because of that glaring issue, I don't think it really cracks into the top tables most of the time, and the reason that you won the tournament here was because not only is it a fairly competent deck, right? It's not the most competent, but it's a fairly competent deck, but it was piloted magnificently, right? Really good gameplay can get the most out of this deck, and so even though it is a B+, deck can definitely take out a lot of the heavy hitters if you approach it the right way. So this is a very nice grade for Alden. I think it's the one that fits the most overall. Anyway, if you guys did like this deck profile, then do be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for of more Vanguard content, be it deck profiles, top 10s, anime reactions. We got an anime season coming up soon, so do stay tuned for that if you are interested in it. The whole shebang, so check it out. And again, like I alluded to at the beginning of this, do check out my Discord, link in the description down below if you want to be a part of these tournaments in the future. And with all that said, take care, God bless.